I read an amazing story from Rav Shalom Schwadron's classic Sefer Sha'al Avicha V'Yagedcha, which means ask your father and he'll tell you. And he has in there a bunch of great stories. And in the front of my book, I printed which stories I want to say over to my students and to video it and share it with hopefully many others. The story is about eating kosher, but the story's lesson is not just about not eating treif. The story teaches us that your struggles and your victories will make life easier for your future children and grandchildren. Which I mean to say, if it's hard for you to do something, and you struggle, and you work on yourself to do the mitzvah, even though it's so hard, Hashem will make that mitzvah much easier for your grandchildren to do. So basically, you could program the future of your children, B'ezrat Hashem, by your behavior today. So it's hard for you, for instance, to daven, but you daven anyway. It's a very likely reality that your children will have an easier time davening. If it's hard for you to make a bracha Allah, but you do it, it'll probably one day come more natural for your own kids. So we know in science there's a word called heredity, which basically means that children will look like their parents, have similar coloring to their parents. But we see from this story that there's something called spiritual heredity as well. Rav Shalom Schwadron says that the story happened on his first trip to Europe.
So what again?
He says he was traveling once to visit Europe the first time, and he was going on a train, I think from Antwerp to Amsterdam, and he's sitting on the train, and all of a sudden he hears somebody speaking Ivrit, Hebrew. Surprised, he turned his ear, and he saw that everyone else was speaking the language of Belgium, which I think is Flemish. And all of a sudden, he hears an echo, a voice in Hebrew. So it must be there's another Jew here. So Rav Shalom said, I turned my head, I looked around, and I see someone sitting not so far from me, and I'm staring at him to see if he's the one that was speaking Hebrew. And he had long hair, which means he wasn't exactly too yeshivish with a big trup. And when he saw that I was staring at him, he got up and he walked over to me and he sat next to me. And I said to him, Shalom. And he said to me, Shalom. And I felt good when he said that, because it's nice to have a Jewish person wish you Shalom. Also, he felt good because his name is Rav Shalom Schwadron, so that's his name. Interestingly, when you leave your house, it's a good idea to always say Shalom, or when you come home to say Shalom, because it's kind of like a blessing and a prayer that there should be Shalom bayis. We find in the story that when the Shunamis lost her son, he got sick from a fever and he died. She took him to get revived from Elisha the Navi, and her husband said, where are you going? She didn't tell her husband that her baby died, so she just said, I'm going to visit the Navi. And she said, Shalom. He said, is everything okay? She said, Shalom. So we see from there that a Jew, when he leaves the house, say Shalom. You could say, I'll see you later, but Shalom is more of a prayer. It turns out the guy sat next to Rav Shalom, not religious Jew, and he says, I don't speak Hebrew so well, but I already visited Palestine a number of times, so I know some Hebrew, even though I don't speak so well. And he said, if you want, maybe let's talk to each other in German. German I know better. German sounds like Yiddish. It's very similar to Yiddish. So he said, let's speak like that. And then he tells me that he's an artist, and he has a whole gallery of famous artistic drawings. And he says, I made them in Amsterdam, beautiful pictures, trees, lakes, bridges, homes. And he tells Rav Shalom that he's not religious, he's not dati, he's not charedi, he's not frum, but he only eats kosher. He tells Rav Shalom that he's not religious, he's not a frum Jew, but Rabbi, I only eat kosher. So Rav Shalom was a little bit surprised, There's 613 mitzvahs. If a guy says, I don't keep any mitzvahs, but this one I keep, I only eat kosher, you'll probably be a little surprised. Why is that the mitzvah you keep? You should keep everything. He says, I eat kosher, not because I'm frum, but because I can't eat treif. I can't eat treif. Rav Shalom was surprised how passionate he is about this mitzvah. He says, those people that eat treif, they eat a horse, they're eating sweat, they're eating filth. I'm nauseous from this. Disgusted, I can't do that. Rav Shalom was about to tell him all the Averis are nauseous. But he says, so someone's clicking his pen and I find it distracting my attention, my concentration. So if you have something in your hand, maybe you could just take it out of your hand. So the man turns to Rav Shalom and he says, so you're traveling to Amsterdam. So if you're traveling to Amsterdam, then I'm sure you're a Jewish man and you already checked out where you could eat. So you already know in Amsterdam where is there a kosher restaurant. So please tell me, because I'm only eating kosher and I also want to eat at that restaurant. So maybe you can tell me what's the address or where it is. So Rav Shalom gave him the address and they were talking about this and that. And then he says, by the way, even though I'm not religious, my father was very religious. So it turns out the non-religious guy tells Rav Shalom about his father to show how religious he was. And this is at the actually main part of the story. He says, this is an amazing story on the Mesiras Nefesh of his father, that he would not eat treif. He only ate kosher. He says, my father was a soldier in the army of Tsar Wilhelm. He was the last of the Tsars of Germany before Hitler. Mashamai. And he says that my father was a soldier and he would never eat the treif of meat that they fed the soldiers. He would only eat bread and vegetables. And his captain, the officer in charge of him, said, excuse me, you're becoming very skinny every day. I see you losing weight. You have to eat the meat like everyone else and be strong. The soldiers have to be very strong. Your muscles need the protein to build the muscles. And he warned him that, and the soldier warned him, basically, the non-religious guy says that my father was religious, and I'll prove it to you. He was a soldier in the army of Tsar Wilhelm. And everyone was given meat to eat to make the soldiers strong, to build up their muscles. They need protein in the meat to build up your muscles. And he said, my father only ate bread and vegetables. He would never put the meat in his mouth. It's not kosher. Even though all the soldiers would eat the meat, they were goyim. He says, my father wouldn't eat it. And even when his captain started screaming at him, that, hello, sir, you're getting weak. You don't look strong. You have to eat your food. There's the army here. We'll give you food to be strong. And he threatened to give my father lashes. And trust me, you don't want to imagine the pain of a leather strap hitting against a person's skin. And he says, my father said, no way. And one day, his captain beat him so hard, you can't imagine the cruelty that he beat my father so badly for not listening to his instructions, his orders, his strict orders that you have to eat. And my father was beaten and embarrassed, humiliated, and he decided to write a letter to the Tsar Wilhelm. And he says, Your Majesty, whatever, Your Highness, Your Excellency, I am a soldier in your army, and I'm Jewish, and I keep the laws of the Torah, which is not to eat treif. I can only eat kosher. It's not enough that they don't even give me kosher. They want to beat me up if I don't eat the not kosher. 2 weeks later, there was an announcement in the camp. All the soldiers should line up. And everyone was rushing to get their guns, their weapons. Someone is disrespectful. I said specifically not to eat during the presentation. You had a break, you could have eaten then. And it turns out, the soldiers lined up in perfect rows. And the captain was looking and searching and examining everyone to make sure they're clean and their guns are working and neat. And then he says, I'm reading a letter I just got from the Tsar Wilhelm and the fancy stationery. And everyone's silent. And he says, would I call your name? Stand forward. And they called my father's name, and he was shaking. And he realized that sometimes when they tell a soldier stand forward and step 3 steps forward, it usually means he's about to be punished in front of everybody. And he realized maybe this is a punishment because he wrote a letter complaining to Tsar Wilhelm. And he took 3 steps forward, and the man said, I'm going to read a letter now. He said, my father was shaking, and he said, this is the letter. Behold, there's a Jewish man, number such and such number, who's complaining that he's not being given kosher food. Well, I am making a new instruction. From now on, he must be fed kosher. And if there is no food like this in the camp, then you have to give him money to go find and buy food like this. From now on, he has to be able to get kosher food, so that this way he could be strong and he could stick to his kosher diet. Excuse me? Is it possible not to make that noise? And when he made that announcement, people started honoring him now. They said, wow, you got written permission from Tsar Wilhelm to be fed kosher? And he says, now you know why I could only eat kosher and I can't eat treif. Because my father was beaten for it. He suffered and he struggled to keep this mitzvah. And it made such an impression that I can't eat treif. My father was almost killed for keeping kosher. So I can't even eat it. So even though the guy says he's not religious, but that he keeps. And that's the concept of Bra Mizak Abba. Sometimes it says that a son can bring his chus to his father. My father passed away when I was a young man. So if I learn a Mishnah, he gets Elam Haba. But a father really can't help a son. If the son died first, father can't. No, sorry. A father's, what he did doesn't really help a son usually in Elam Haba. But in other words, Avram Avinu can't save Yishmael. And Yitzchak can't save Esav in the next world. But in this world, they could. And what I'm trying to say is that sometimes when you do something and you try hard to do a mitzvah, this will make life much easier, Be'ez Hashem, for your children and grandchildren. There's an amazing story in Rav Shalom Schwadron's book called Animals, People, or Angels. In life, always ask yourself, is your behavior similar to an animal? Or to a person, or maybe to an angel. There are some people in this world that have something called Atzilus HaNefesh. Atzilus HaNefesh means that they're haibinin people, they're very uplifted people, they're elevated, they're not just regular people, they're very, I would say, heavenly people, they're connected to a higher source. And then there's some people that they're behemoths, they're shkatzim. Shkatzim really means bugs. They act like really creatures that crawl on the floor, cockroaches and mosquitoes and them.